The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, and my hands were already shaking before I even answered it. My mother's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes after years of practice, after decades of pretending everything is fine while everything burns. She said my name like she'd been rehearsing it. Like she'd run it through her mouth 100 times before dialing. We need you to come home. Not hello. Not how are you. Not I'm sorry for the 10 years of silence. Not I'm sorry for the graduation we missed. Not I'm sorry for the wedding you planned alone. Not I'm sorry for the hospital room where you sat by yourself after your appendix nearly killed you and you called us and we let it go to voicemail. Just, we need you to come home. I almost laughed. I almost dropped the phone and laughed until my lungs gave out. Because that's the thing about families like mine. They don't come back with apologies. They come back with invoices. I asked her what was wrong. And she told me about Marcus. Marcus. My brother. The son who could do no wrong, who graduated top of his class, who got the car at 16 while I took the bus, who got the tuition paid while I filed for financial aid, who called our parents every Sunday while I sat in a studio apartment wondering if they'd even notice if I stopped existing. Marcus had stage 4 kidney disease. His body was failing him. He needed a transplant. And according to his medical team, a living donor from within the family was his best chance. My father had already been tested. Not a match. My mother had already been tested. Not a match. And now they were calling me. After 10 years. They were calling me. Because they needed something from the spare child. The backup. The one they discarded the moment Marcus proved himself useful. My mother was still talking. Something about family. Something about blood. Something about how no matter what happened between us, we were still connected by something deeper than grudges. She used the word grudges. Like what I carried was a grudge. Like a decade of silence from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally was something I was choosing to hold on to out of spite. I told her I would think about it. She said they were hoping I'd come in for testing as soon as possible. I told her I would think about it. She paused. And then she said, "He's your brother." Like that settled it. Like those 3 words were a magic key that was supposed to unlock every door inside me that they'd spent 10 years slamming shut. I hung up. And then I sat on my kitchen floor for 45 minutes and stared at the ceiling because I genuinely did not know who I was in that moment. My husband found me there. Daniel. The man I had married in a courthouse with 2 friends as witnesses because my family had not come. Because I'd sent them an invitation and received nothing back. Not even a no. Just nothing. He sat down on the floor beside me without asking why I was on the floor. That's the thing about people who actually love you. They don't demand an explanation before they sit with you in the hard moment. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Without flinching. Without telling me what I should do. When I was done he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Not what are you going to do? Not you have to help him, he's family. Not think about how you'd feel if he died and you did nothing. What do you want to do? I told him I didn't know. He nodded and said we'd figure it out together. And that right there. That 2-second exchange. Was more parenting than my parents had given me in my entire adult life. I called my therapist the next morning. Her name is Dr. Reeves and she has seen me through the worst years of my life and she does not sugarcoat anything. I told her about the phone call. She asked me how it made me feel. I said it made me feel like a spare part. Like a backup generator. Like something they'd stored in a closet and were now pulling out because the main power had failed. She said that was a very clear and accurate description. She asked me what I was leaning toward. I said I didn't know. I said part of me wanted to say no immediately, to hang up on that chapter of my life for good. But another part of me was thinking about Marcus. Not about my parents. About Marcus. Because here's the complicated thing. Marcus and I were not close. We were never close. But Marcus had not been the one to cut me off. My parents had. Marcus had just been the beneficiary of a system that wasn't his fault. He was sick. He was dying. And whatever my parents were, whatever they'd done, Marcus was a human being in a body that was failing him. Dr. Reeves said, "So you're separating Marcus from your parents?" I said yes. Maybe. I didn't know. She said that was healthy. She also said that donating an organ was one of the most significant physical decisions a person could make and that I was under no obligation to do it under any circumstances. And that I should never let guilt or emotional manipulation be the reason I made a medical decision with permanent consequences. I wrote that down. I kept it in my pocket for the next 2 weeks. I agreed to the testing. Not because my mother asked me to. Not because she said he's your brother. Not because I felt guilty or afraid of what choosing no would say about me as a person. I agreed to the testing because I needed to know. Because I needed to look at this thing directly and make a decision from a place of full information, not from a place of running away from something hard. Daniel came with me. He sat in the waiting room and read a golf magazine he had zero interest in for 2 hours while they drew my blood and took my history and asked me questions about my health that I answered as honestly as I could. The technician who processed my intake was kind. She could tell I was tense. She made small talk about the weather. She offered me a cup of water that I accepted even though I wasn't thirsty because it gave my hands something to do. She said the results would be back within 2 weeks. I said thank you. And I went home and I waited. 12 days later the doctor called me into a private consultation. Not a nurse. Not a letter. The doctor. That should have told me something. His name was Dr. Ellison and he had a very careful face. The kind of face that doctors practice in the mirror for exactly these moments. The face that says I'm about to tell you something that is going to change your life and I need you to stay calm. He asked if I had anyone with me. I said my husband was in the waiting room. He asked if I'd like to bring him in. I said yes. Daniel came in and sat beside me and took my hand before the doctor even opened his mouth. Dr. Ellison said, the compatibility testing for the transplant came back, and I'm afraid the results are complicated. I said, am I a match? He said, that's what I need to talk to you about. He opened the folder on his desk. He said the blood work and the tissue typing had come back with some results that were inconsistent with what the family had provided. I didn't understand at first. I asked him what he meant by inconsistent. He was very gentle. He was very careful. He said, based on the genetic markers we use for transplant compatibility testing, we are seeing results that indicate you may not be biologically related to the other family members who were tested. The room got very quiet. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. I said, say that again. Dr. Ellison said, the compatibility panel suggests that you do not share the biological markers that would be expected between siblings or between a parent and child. Which means, in medical terms, that you are not a genetic match for your brother. And the testing also indicates that the family members who listed themselves as your parents may not be your biological parents. I heard every word he said. And I also heard absolutely nothing. My entire body went somewhere else. Some other room. Some other planet. Daniel was talking. I could hear his voice but not the words. He was asking the doctor questions. Professional, steady questions. Because Daniel, who loves me, understood in that moment that I had temporarily left the building and someone needed to hold the conversation. I stared at the fake plant in the corner of Dr. Ellison's office. I thought about my mother's hands. The way she used to braid my hair when I was small. I thought about a birthday cake she made me when I was 7, yellow cake with chocolate frosting, my favorite. I thought about the way my father used to call me kiddo before things got complicated. Before Marcus started winning everything and I started losing the competition I hadn't known I was in. I thought about every way I was different from them. The ways I'd chalked up to just being me. My height. My eyes. The way I processed things. The way I felt, always, slightly outside of the family frame. Like a photo that had been added to the album later. Slid into the sleeve at an angle. I thought, oh. I don't know how long we were in that office. Daniel got me to the car. He got me water from a gas station we stopped at on the way home. He got me to the couch and covered me with a blanket and sat beside me without touching his phone once. At some point I started crying. Not sobbing. Just leaking. The quiet kind of crying that happens when your body doesn't have the energy for drama, when the thing you're processing is too big for noise. Daniel said, you don't have to figure this out tonight. I said, who am I? He said, you're my wife. You're the person who leaves the porch light on for me. You're the one who cried at that documentary about penguins. You're the person who learned to make soup from scratch because I was sick that one winter. You are not a blood test. I cried harder after that. The next 3 days were the quietest days of my life. I went to work because I needed something structural around me. I answered emails. I sat in meetings. I ate lunch at my desk. I came home. I did not call my mother. Daniel did not push me. Dr. Reeves, when I called her, did not push me either. She said this was a seismic event and I was allowed to stand still while the ground moved. On the 4th day I sat down with a legal pad and I wrote out every question I had. Who are my biological parents? Was I adopted? Was I given up? Was I taken? Did my parents know all along? Did my parents find out at some point and say nothing? Was this the reason for the distance? Was this the reason I'd always felt like a visitor in my own family? Was I a secret? Was I a mistake? Was I a choice they regretted? I filled 3 pages. Then I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Which told me she'd been waiting. I didn't say hello. I said, the testing results came back and there's something we need to talk about. She went very quiet. And in that quiet, before she said a single word, I knew. She already knew. She had already known. I said, Mom. And something in her broke. I could hear it through the phone. The structural thing that had been holding her posture together in every conversation we'd ever had. I heard it crack. She said, I was hoping the tests wouldn't show it. I said, tell me everything. Here is what she told me. When she and my father were young and first married, they had struggled to have children. Marcus had come after 3 years and what she described as a lot of help. But after Marcus, the doctors said another pregnancy was unlikely. Her sister, my Aunt Cora, who I had always liked but never understood why I felt closer to her than to my own parents, her sister Cora had a different story. Cora had been young and unmarried and in a situation she hadn't been ready for. And so within the family there had been an arrangement. Private. Not legal. Not through any agency. Just a family agreement. Cora had given birth to me. My parents had taken me home. And everyone had agreed to never speak of it. Cora had moved 2 states away when I was 18 months old. I had always been told she was just the distant aunt. The one who sent nice birthday cards. The one who called on holidays and always seemed slightly emotional when she talked to me in a way I could never explain. My mother was crying now. Real crying. Not performance. She said, we were going to tell you. We always said we would tell you. But then you and Marcus were older and it seemed like it would hurt more than help. And then you were teenagers and the timing was never right. And then you were adults and we'd waited so long it felt impossible. I said, so you just decided I would never know. She said, we didn't decide. We just never did it. I said, and when you called me about Marcus? When you needed me to come in for testing? You were hoping the results wouldn't show it. You were hoping that you could get what you needed from me without ever having to tell me the truth. Silence. Long silence. She said, I don't know what I was hoping. I said, I do. And I hung up. I called Aunt Cora that night. My hands were shaking so hard I misdialed twice. She answered and before I could say anything she said, oh sweetheart. They finally told you. And I started crying in a way I hadn't since I was small. Since I was a child who didn't know yet that the world could be this complicated and this strange and this full of silences that other people keep for you without your consent. Cora cried too. She said she had wanted to tell me. She said there had been an agreement and she'd honored it because she thought it was the right thing for me. She said she had watched me from a distance for 34 years and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. I asked her who my father was. She got quiet. She said it was a long story. I said I had time. She said his name. A man I'd never heard of. A man she'd loved briefly and desperately when she was 22. A man who hadn't known about me, who had moved across the country before she'd found out she was pregnant, who she had never tracked down because back then that was harder and she'd already made the decision about what came next. I said, is he still alive? She said she didn't know. I said, would you help me find out? She said, yes. Absolutely yes. Whatever you need. My father, the man who raised me, called the following morning. He sounded smaller than I'd ever heard him sound. Like the air had gone out of him overnight. He said, your mother told me she spoke with you. I said, yes. He said, I need you to know that we loved you. That we always loved you. That you were never less ours because of where you came from. I said, then why did you give me less? Silence. I said, why did Marcus get the car and the tuition and the Sunday phone calls and the showing up? Why did I get the silence for 10 years? If I was truly yours, truly equal, truly loved the same, why was the life you gave me so different from the life you gave him? He didn't have an answer. That was its own kind of answer. He said, I don't know. I think we always knew deep down and it affected us in ways we didn't want to admit. I said, so you knew? He said, not consciously. I said, but enough. He didn't deny it. I said, I have to go. He said, please don't disappear. I said, you don't get to say that to me. And I hung up. The thing about discovering that your entire foundation is built on something different than you thought is that it doesn't immediately break you. It doesn't shatter you in an instant. It's slower than that. It works its way through you like water through rock. Gradually. Persistently. And what it erodes is not you but the false version. The constructed version. The scaffolding you'd built your identity on. And what's left underneath, when the scaffolding comes down, is just you. Actual you. The person who existed before the story they told you about yourself. I found that oddly freeing. And terrifying. And everything in between. I did not give Marcus my kidney. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't because I was angry. It wasn't spite. It wasn't punishment. It was because I was not a genetic match. The doctor had already told me that. The biology that my parents had hidden from me had, in its own strange way, already made the decision before I had to. I was not compatible. And so the question of whether I would have done it, whether I could have pushed past the pain and the betrayal and offered my body for a brother who shared no blood with me but who had also never hurt me directly, that question would forever remain unanswered. I sat with that for a long time. I decided I was okay with not knowing. Marcus did find a donor eventually. A non-related match through the National Registry. Someone anonymous and generous and unconnected to our story who gave him a chance at life for no reason other than goodness. I heard this through Cora, who had become my primary source of family information. Who had become, in the months that followed, something I could not fully name yet but was beginning to feel like what a mother actually is. She called me every week. She remembered details I mentioned in passing. She sent things in the mail. Small things. A newspaper clipping she thought I'd like. A recipe she said she made when she was pregnant and craving something sweet. A photo of herself at 22, laughing at something outside the frame, that I stared at for a long time because the laugh was mine. Exactly mine. A laugh I'd always had that no one in my family could explain. I framed that photo. It sits on my desk now. I hired a genealogist to help me find my biological father. His name is Robert. He's 61 years old and he lives in Oregon and he builds custom furniture in a workshop behind his house and he has 2 adult children from a marriage that ended 8 years ago and he has no idea I exist. Not yet. I have a letter written. Drafted and revised maybe 20 times. Sitting in my desk drawer. I haven't sent it. Daniel says there's no rush. Dr. Reeves says I'll know when I'm ready. Cora says she'll support whatever I decide. I look at the letter sometimes. I think about what it would mean for him to open it. What it would mean for his children, my half-siblings maybe, to suddenly have a new variable in their family equation. I think about what it would mean for me if he doesn't want to know. And I think about what it would mean for me if he does. Both possibilities terrify me. Both possibilities also feel like possibilities. Which is more than I had before. I have not spoken to my parents since those 2 phone calls. They have reached out several times. My mother sends texts that are long and careful and full of the language of therapy, words like boundaries and accountability and healing that feel borrowed from a book she read rather than lived. My father sends shorter messages. Just checking in. Thinking of you. Hope you're well. I read them all. I have not responded to any of them. This is not forever. I don't think. But it is for now. And for now is enough. For now is actually the only thing any of us have anyway, isn't it? We make decisions for now and we hope they were right and we live with them either way. Here is what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. I know that family is not just biology. I know that because Cora is my biology and she was a stranger to me until recently and what we're building now is real and tender and fragile and worth protecting. I know that family is not just shared history. I know that because I shared a history with my parents and Marcus and the history did not make me feel seen or safe or loved in the way that matters. I know that family is something you construct. Something you choose. Something that requires maintenance and honesty and the willingness to sit on the floor with someone when the ceiling falls in. Daniel is my family. Cora is becoming my family. Dr. Reeves, in her clinical consistent way, is part of the structure that holds me. My parents are people I grew up with. People who made decisions about my life that I didn't consent to. People who loved me in the only way they knew how, which was insufficiently and unequally and in ways that left marks. I don't hate them. I also don't know what to do with them yet. Marcus sent me a message 3 months after his surgery. It was longer than I expected. He said he was sorry. Not for being sick. But for the life we'd lived in the same house and he'd never once asked me if I was okay. He said he'd spent a lot of time in recovery thinking about what it meant to almost die and what you'd want different if you got to stay. He said he wanted to know me. Actually know me. If I was open to it. He said he understood if I wasn't. He said he'd wait. I read that message probably 100 times. I haven't responded yet. But I've drafted a response. That feels like something. The genealogist sent me something last week. A photo she'd found. Robert at about 23. Young. Standing in front of a half-built cabinet, smiling at the camera with a crooked smile that went higher on the right side. I have that smile. I have always had that smile. My parents used to say it came from nowhere. That neither of them knew where I got it from. Now I know. I held that photo for a long time. And then I went to my desk and I took out the letter and I read it one more time. And I sealed the envelope. I haven't mailed it yet. But it's sealed. That's further than I've ever gotten. Here is the thing I want to say to anyone who has sat in a doctor's office and had the ground move underneath them. Anyone who has held a phone after a call that rearranged the furniture of who they thought they were. You are allowed to take time. You are allowed to be angry and grieving and confused and relieved all at once because all of those things make sense at the same time. You are not obligated to perform forgiveness on a timeline that comforts other people. You are not obligated to sacrifice your body or your peace or your hard-won stability for people who spent years treating you as optional. You are not required to make their guilt more comfortable by rushing toward reconciliation. You are allowed to rebuild from the foundation up. And you are allowed to choose every single brick. The porch light is on. Daniel just came home. Cora called this morning and we talked for an hour about nothing important and everything important at the same time. The letter sits on the entry table where I can see it when I come in. I'll mail it or I won't. I'll respond to Marcus or I won't. I'll call my parents eventually or I won't. And none of those decisions will define me. Because I am not the story they told about me. I am the story I'm still writing. Now I have a question for you. If you discovered everything you believed about your origins was a carefully kept lie, and the family that hid it from you was now asking something enormous from you, would you be able to separate what they did from what was right? Or would you need the anger first? Tell me what you would have done. Because I'm still not sure I got it right. And maybe that's the most human thing about this whole story.